sometimes people are always looking for a miracle drug, You want to, eliminate lung cancer? Quit smoking, right? You want to eliminate diabetes? Quit carbohydrates. That's simple as that. I think you're
Oh
on the same
man.
page as me, eh,
Yeah,
Joe?
totally, totally, totally. If you remove the carbohydrates, you remove the diabetes. That's something that I've been saying like every 5 minutes for the last 3 years, 4 years. Whoa, this was crazy. This was a really, really amazing conversation with an incredibly intelligent man. Norm Dokis has a couple of really amazing kinds of resources and things that he's been working on. He's been on Chuck's First People's Kitchen recently, earlier this week, actually. So I'll link to that for everybody. But has been responsible for creating resources, documentary-based resources like Wisnada, Let's Eat, with I believe with friendship centers throughout Ontario. I'll link to that little documentary as well. Really, really powerful story. How beneficial it is to, well, first of all, I guess do your own research. I mean, this is something that he did all on his own, to be able to take his diagnosis of diabetes and say, or writing the line of a diagnosis of diabetes, and to say, well, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to do a little bit of research. What do I need to do? And realize that controlling his blood sugar is all that needed to be done. And if you do not have sugar, your blood sugar is controlled. Zero carbohydrates. And understanding early on that we are a carbohydrate intolerant species. After trying and engaging in some of the conventional diabetes interventions, switching from white breads to whole wheat breads, switching types of sugar, have honey instead of table sugar or maple syrup, and how this was unsuccessful until he said, well, the real problem here is the carbohydrates. Taking a look into the natural world and eliminating carbohydrates as they are not very present and valuable in the natural world that we live in anyways here in Ontario. So really, really powerful story of taking control over diabetes via carbohydrate restriction / elimination. And it's one decision that we have to make, realizing that we are a carbohydrate intolerant species and that we are not designed to consume fats and carbohydrates together, or carbohydrates whatsoever. And it's a really, really good example of that. I'm very, very thankful for Norm to be able to take time out. I hope to be able to speak with him again soon. And I'll link to some of his other resources, really cool shows and documentaries he's been a part of in the past already. So really fun stuff. Have fun, friends. I guess, let's just have a chat and kind of listen to your story a little.
Well, thanks for the invite, Joe. I really support your initiative here to really, tackle diabetes head on, in terms of like eliminating what the problem is, right? So the problem for our people is carbohydrates, overabundance of carbohydrates, and things like corn sweeteners and just things our bodies were not meant to process, right? So 3 years ago, I did a blood test. Doctor called me right away, and they were like panicking and said, like, you're going to have diabetes. Like, you're just on the cusp here. So you got to do something about it. And of course, it was a bunch of pamphlets about diabetes clinic, diabetes this, and support systems. And I did my own research and come to a conclusion that, carbohydrates the problem. My body cannot process carbohydrates, turns it into sugar right away. I kind of always had this feeling, right? I would gain weight drinking beer with the boys. I was never like good with carbs, right? So that was 3 years ago. I've never touched a teaspoon of sugar since. I keep my carb intake between 30 to 50 grams a day, and then I'm able to. I feel fantastic. I have no cravings for sugar. I love eating the high fat diet and meats and fish and everything else that we were meant to be. And I'm a big believer that our bodies tell us what to eat. And if we examine, Joe, like, you know, in terms of what your knowledge base around Creator's Garden, if we examine our Creator's Garden, you know, more, it's not filled with artificial corn sweeteners and all this crap, right? To me, you know, our Creator's Garden is, we went to an old abandoned beaver pond, you know, that started growing in like a field and really had nice, you know, roots and stuff like that that we were able to process some berries and roots and stuff like that, and assisted us with our carbs and intake at that level, at a level that we can sustain.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Rick, I really like that. One of the things that I really kind of like to share is that we are a carbohydrate intolerant species. It seems as though any amount of exogenous carbohydrates that are ingested are immediately dealt with as a toxin. And yes, you know, your body needs sugar. It needs to always maintain a certain amount of blood sugar for your brain, for certain cells in your kidneys and nerves, and for your red blood cells and things like that. But the amount that it actually needs is quite low. But I think more importantly, what happens when we do have or engage in any amount of exogenous carbohydrate, eating it, the way that sugar is dealt with is generally via sacrifice. So all of that sugar, it's immediately sent into your endothelial cells in your blood vessels, and they are damaged because of it. All of that sugar is sent into your kidneys, into the mesangial cells in your kidneys, where they are damaged, into your nerve cells as well. And so any little amount of sugar that we do have is sent into sacrificial cells, and where destruction happens, glycation happens. And it just seems as though every time we're engaging in excess of exogenous carbohydrate, there is a panic situation. Your body does everything it can to get rid of it as fast as possible, much like toxins. And then the other thing that you were saying too is just about carbohydrates. And kind of the way that we're taught, you know, when we do have diabetes, we go to these care clinics and things like that. We're taught that there are kind of good ones and there are bad ones. But one of the things that I kind of picked out in what you just said is that kind of it all gets turned into sugar eventually, and it all will have a negative effect. That all carbohydrates break down into sugar very fast and become those toxic components. And that's something that is not really taught too often. There's something that's not really clear to everybody, is that a carbohydrate is a carbohydrate is a carbohydrate. We're taught that there's good and bad, that there's this thing called a glycemic index, that some sugar takes longer to absorb than others. But the realities of the GI scale, glycemic index scale, is that it's built upon some of the junkiest made up science. In some of these studies, they have confidence intervals of 6%. Meaning that it's only right in 6% of people, that it's wrong in 94%. And it's published as though their conclusions are accurate, full of fabricated data and just made up stuff. The GI scale is something that doesn't apply to people. The only people that understand this are type 1 diabetics who know that a carbohydrate is a carbohydrate. It's all going to turn into sugar, and it's all going to have a negative effect on health outcomes, regardless of their classification in a GI scale. But yeah, so that was a really good realization early on. I don't know what your resources were or how you went about learning this, but carbohydrates all turn into sugar, and this is all going to have a negative impact on your ability to heal from diabetes. And it's really remarkable to hear that so early on.
You know, and in terms of like, I'm a firm believer in our sixth sense, right? That when we're connected to our surroundings, our body's going to tell us what to eat. Pregnant women are a classic example about that, right? And what they crave, it's phenomenal. how powerful our mind and our bodies are together, work together. And I often, when I'm doing my little bush tours and that, I say, like, our survival as a species depends on protein, fat, and starch, right? Starch. I'm not saying carbohydrates to the max here, right? And if you look around us, what's available is what we're meant to eat. Secondly, those big carbohydrate stores were meant for massive armies, and societies were built, like these farming societies were built around these massive armies. That's what we're, as scientists and anthropologists are thinking now. They're forced into cities, but people really succeeded mostly, Joe, people succeeded mostly as hunter-gatherer societies. There's no comparison. Then when we look at in terms of fat and proteins, and even some of the medicines that are we talk a lot about today in terms of antioxidants, they're not allowed to perform well when they're interrupted by these complex carbohydrates, right? So if they're because antioxidants are attacking initial sources of like oxygen cells that went in our body, yeah, the battle, right? And if there's too much poison in the body, flipped on the other scale, they're not allowed to perform. So sometimes people are always looking for a miracle drug. You want to eliminate lung cancer? Quit smoking, right? You want to eliminate diabetes? Quit carbohydrates. That's simple as that. I think you're on the same page as me,
yeah,
Joe?
Totally. If you remove the carbohydrates, you remove the diabetes. That's something that I've been saying like every 5 minutes for the last 3 years, 4 years. But it's super interesting. Yeah, about the antioxidants, and because people always come to me, my area of expertise is in medicine, is in all of our plant-based medicine. And so we always want medicine for detox, and we want to find what's the most powerful antioxidant, like the chaga or the shkitaga. And, we want to use this medicine because it's so good at cleaning out from all of the oxidative damage inside of our body. One of the things that folks will forget is that the reason why you need an antioxidant is to manage the amount of oxidative stress that's happening inside of your body. And the way that this is referred to is redox balance, the reactive oxidative balance inside of your body. And so the more out of whack your redox balance is, the more antioxidants your body requires. And it makes its own. Your liver makes all of these really, really incredibly powerful antioxidant enzymes. And the quickest way and the most effective way to knock your redox balance, to force your body into a situation where it requires massive amounts of antioxidants, is hyperglycemia. When your blood sugar is too high, that's the quickest, most effective and devastating way to alter and mismanage your redox balance. So now your liver is going to have to create all of these antioxidants. Now we're going to need to rely on medicine. And now it becomes necessary to clean up all of the damage caused by hyperglycemia, caused by high blood sugar. So yeah, the role and responsibility in a detoxification protocol or to restore redox balance is to eliminate the possibilities of ever experiencing hyperglycemia. And that means, just like what you said, stop the carbohydrates and it's over.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Good. Well, it's good to talk to you and others, who think the same. My mind and my body are like totally in sync. My ability to work and function long hours is incredible. I'm 53 years old, and I got incredible energy. I could just work. So in terms of like needing lots of carbs to do a marathon, not for me, thanks. The other part is in terms of my mind healing, it's limitless in that regard now. I actually feel that I'm going to live a long, long time. I'm very, very proud of my accomplishment in terms of closing the door on carbs.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any kind of challenges early on when you kind of were coming to these realizations that uh, diabetes is just an inability to control blood sugar, and if you stop having sugar, then your diabetes is going to be, you know, your blood sugar is controlled, therefore you don't have any diabetes. That's a big jump to kind of go from
Yeah,
this mixed diet into
yeah.
just saying, okay, well, let's get rid of the carbs. How does this look? What were your first couple days like, or your first couple months, or something like that?
Yeah, and I think it's battling first off the misinformation or the information that's pumped out there all the time that, oh, why don't you just replace white sugar with cane sugar? Why don't you replace it with maple syrup? Why don't you replace white bread with brown bread? It's all baloney, right? Of course, I did that. I did a little bit of maple syrup. I went to brown bread. And this was like 5 years ago. I love kidney beans. I love all the like some of these healthy carbs, right, that I used to have in my diet, and unfortunately, I forfeited them all. But it was a clean cut break from all that, and no cravings. You know, afterwards, it was just like it was like my it was like I never they were never part of my life before and never meant to be part of my life. And I think, you know, all those happy molecules in your body, your gut microbes are saying, pretty damn smart move. That's, you know, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, they speak, they can, like the water inside of us, right? It is like it holds memory and it has intelligence, and we're 80% water, our brain water, right? And uh, I think, and it's 4 billion-year-old molecules that's in our bodies too. You know, so in that history, they're smart.
Mhm.
Those molecules inside of us are very smart, and I think they're happy I made that decision.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Oh man, that's crazy. Yeah. I always think of like just, you know, going back to that redox balance, your liver can create the most powerful antioxidants. You don't we don't get antioxidants from plants anyways, but your liver makes them really, really powerful enzymes. And when they're all being spent on healing from the damage caused by hyperglycemia, when your blood sugar is too high, those antioxidants cannot be spent on the more chronic systemic
Yeah,
issues that
yeah.
are incurring, you know, every single day for the past 50 years, that we haven't been able to clean up any of these damages. And some of those damages will turn into or end up resulting in, I mean, you're looking at inflammatory diseases. It's the reactive the oxidative damage that drives the chronic systemic inflammation, that drives most chronic disease and the aging process. And you're looking
Mm,
at the amount of chronic disease that we have, the aging process that we go through now versus 200 years ago, like it's very, very different, right? And those moments when our blood sugar is controlled, all those antioxidants are able to actually do their job. Not
yeah.
all spend, you know, it's like a police officer at a traffic light. You know, he'd be way more effective as a police officer, you know, on patrol doing what he's supposed to do, than
Mm.
sitting at a traffic light all day doing this job that, you know, it's immediate, it does have to be done, the light is out. But yeah, it's just kind of really interesting for that. Hey, you know, the other really cool thing that you were saying in the beginning, that another one of my favorite ideas is that yeah, even just the way that you framed it was really beautiful too, just kind of looking at the creator's garden and saying, hey, you know, who what's here, and the realization that we're in a pretty much like a pretty significant carbohydrate desert. There's not too many natural carbs to engage with, but I think more importantly too, there's never a mixture of fats and carbohydrates together. when we mix fats and carbohydrates together, this tastes really good. It's called a hyper palatable experience. And that, I think, is one of the, there's this really amazing process called the Randall cycle that we've known since 1963, that our bodies cannot use fats and carbohydrates at the same time. They blockade each other from being able to enter into the cell. And so this is what's responsible. One of the primary driving forces of diabetes and obesity is activating the Randall cycle, mixing fats and carbohydrates together. And yeah, kind of our responsibility you spoke to early on, to look into the Creator's garden, look into our natural world and say, well, what is here? We have like strawberries the size of, your mother's pinky toenail, and blueberries here and there. Maple syrup and wild rice at the end of the season, maple syrup at the beginning of the season. But how much of that, I think, is, or I guess, yeah, just kind of looking at our environment where we have developed in and where we've lived for however many, thousands of years. How much of these carbohydrates did we actually have? And kind of a perspective that I like to bring forward too is kind of like a really crazy idea that we are the last of our species. It wasn't too long ago, there was so many different types of human species that were here at the same time as us. The Neanderthalensis, the Denisovans, and etc. all over the world. There are so many different types of humans, just like there's a whole bunch of different types of bears. You have panda bears and polar bears and everything in between. It's kind of crazy to think that not too long ago, there was a bunch of different types of humans. And so that we are a species that's about 350,000 years old. We've been developing for 4.5 million years old. And throughout this entire time period, there was these animals called megafauna. The mammoths, the mastodons, the beavers the size of cars. And like you think a moose is the biggest in the deer family. There's many different types of deer that were far larger than a moose, which is kind of crazy to think about. And when you're thinking about the world that we lived in, before the extinction of the megafauna, about 10,000 years ago, it's not that long ago.
Which we were partially responsible for.
Yeah, eaten. Yeah, for sure.
We ate them all.
Yeah, eating them all. And so like one of the things that folks will always point to is to say, well, in the natural world, there is fruit, there is blueberries, and you could dry them, and you could make maple sugar, and you can dry and store wild rice throughout the year or whatever, but when you're thinking about, I worked in a lot of rice beds, and the biggest issue in establishing the rice beds was geese and moose would come through and eat so much of it so fast. When you're thinking of the environment that we lived in throughout the development and majority of the existence of our species, there was megafauna. And what do megafauna eat? They eat plants, they eat berries, they eat all the fruit. And so if you're thinking you can't even establish a rice bed because of some geese and ducks and one moose walked through and just kind of like really ravaged it all. Imagine a continent covered in megafauna. How much plants are we going to have access to then? I have people complain in Sudbury that a bear comes in to their spot where they pick blueberries and ate it all, like one bear. And then it's like, well, imagine the world full of megafauna. How much blueberries you think you're going to have access to then? It's greatly reduced. It is only when the megafauna go extinct do all of these plant foods become more available. It's like we kind of have a skewed idea today as to what is our natural environment. But yeah, this idea of looking into the Creator's garden and saying, what do you have for me? What is my role here? And the realities of being a carbohydrate desert and our responsibility to live within that. That was a really beautiful thing you kind of mentioned earlier on too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we could pick up our conversation again on that, Joe. I think in terms of, what you're dealing with a lot of times are people who are fanatic in their beliefs of healthy carbs and fruits and vegetables and all that, right? And you know, and in terms of softening the blow of that message is something that that we could work on. And I understand the megafauna portion of it, but for me, when I'm cooking up my deer meat, I'm cooking up the forest.
Yeah.
And I smell the forest, and I'm eating all that healthy stuff that that deer ate, except it's filtering the carbs for me.
Oh my God.
Let's leave it there, buddy.
That's so good. Holy jeez. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was a couple real good little nuggets in there. Wow.
Yeah, because the argument like from fanatics with that, right, is like avocados are not supposed to be here. It was a megafauna fruit that was kept alive by our ancestors, right? It was worked at very, very hard. Celery, right, is a very low carb vegetable, but that took like 4,000 years to make it look like the way it does, right? And so the argument by people is, you know, that our ancestors all over the world worked very hard to shape a lot of the fruits and vegetables to look like the way they are today, and grains right out of grass. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to respect their point of view on that. I think it's terms of like our intakes of carbs too, right? Balance is everything. In terms of drought for our food sources too, right? I think if we're not mixing so much fat with these artificial carbs, I'll call them, we may not have that problem either, right? But we've created a big problem for us in modern times is because we're misusing the food. That's the way it was intended to be eaten. And so if I'm going to climb Mount Everest, you know, I want vitamin B. You know, I want to eat that winter food that's given to me, herring and Cisco's, you know, and things that give you that power. Imagine starving all winter and now you got maple syrup. Boy, that brings up your, you know, however that helps out your body. I think maybe that's the way nature intended it to be because of the creator's gifts. I think we complicate it so much by mixing it all up too much. Yeah, it's not pure.
Yeah. So like kind of like the seasonal living versus you know, I like maple syrup so much in the spring, I'm gonna have it every day for the entire year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not expecting something to go wrong.
Yeah.
And using an evaporator pan, not hand bombing everything over an open fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, RO machines. Yeah, wow, that's freaking beautiful, man. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Awesome, Joel. I got many more angles to things too. I got to get going, and we should chat at least once a month, or I'm And it was interesting when you came out with your you know, vision on Creator's Garden. I have one I call, you know, our ancestors' garden, and I was like, wow, that's similar. This guy thinks a lot like myself, right? And so I always put myself in our ancestors' shoes. How did they survive, right? It was harsh environment, and they had to be clearly very organized, really in touch with their environment. Dreams, the important to predict where you're going to eat next, right? And that's mind, body, and spirit really totally connected with your environment of being an Anishinaabe. Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
we should expand more on that. I wrote a lot of stuff in terms of our garden, our our nature's garden. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. This is crazy. Yeah, I can't wait to meet again. This
All
is
right.
incredibly, incredibly valuable. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for sharing.
Okay, Joe. Have a
Cool.
good weekend, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.